The Iran crisis has had a significant impact on us all. The large rise in oil prices has led to economic uncertainty and worries of yet another period of high inflation. In this situation, consumers are likely to be looking for ways to mitigate the effects of price rises. Therefore, grocery brand manufacturers are concerned about the potential effects on volumes in the categories where they operate, on the choice between brands and private label, and in store choice, which also might change. How can we learn from past and current trends to identify the best courses of action? I'm Richard Herbert, an independent global insight consultant working with Europanel. In a series of short videos, I'll be talking to a number of leading professors in the grocery field. The aim is to discuss their experience and work in such hard economic times, and of course, the advice they would give. Today, I'd like to welcome Oliver Koll, Professor of Marketing at Innsbruck University, and our subject is volume levels and trends. Oliver, welcome. Hi. Which trends do we see in the FMCG grocery market in terms of overall growth?
Hello, Richard. It's a pleasure to start out this interview series with you. And obviously, I'd like to start quoting a piece of research by Europanel, the Europanel barometer. And if we look back over the past 15 years, what we see is a roughly 1% increase in volume each year over the past 15 years. This is more pronounced, not surprisingly, where population growth is higher. And what we also see is that it typically lags a little behind population growth. And that is mostly driven by changes in the lifestyle of populations, especially in Western cultures, but also all over the world, with people deciding to eat out more often, eating on the go, maybe ordering food delivery to their homes. But irrespective of these lifestyle changes, what we do see is that FMCG tends to grow much more in times of crisis, whether that's the affordability crisis in 2009 and now in 2024, whether that's COVID, where obviously other factors also played a role in terms of forcing people to eat at home, the recent Iran crisis, and just interesting that doesn't just only affect food and grocery purchases. I just yesterday read a headline that said that the Thermomix, which is a popular kitchen aid, has reached new record sales in spite of the crisis. And I would almost argue it reached record sales because of the crisis, because people tend to spend more at home, enjoy life at home more, because they may lack the resources to eat out. Now, one interesting finding, though, is that over the past 6 years, we see that in the grocery market, about half of all categories are growing. And that growth is not related to the changes in price in these categories. So it's not like categories shrink where prices are rising more and categories grow where prices are rising less. We see that both winning and losing categories have experienced relatively similar average price increases over the past 6 years.
So effectively, you seem to be implying that crises don't affect people's willingness to spend, specifically on grocery at least.
No, certainly not. That's not what I want to imply. What I want to imply is that people don't seem to be looking at specific categories and assess whether they have experienced higher or lower price increases. It seems like people have a need to reduce their spending overall, which we see in a heightened growth of discounters, more private label growth. But it's not like people investigate price increases for individual categories and decide to stop purchasing categories where prices have increased more than others.
So it's more of an overall view of the shopping basket spend rather than the individual components of that is I think what you're saying. Yep. In terms of categories, you mentioned that about a half of all categories are continuing to grow despite the high inflation a couple of years ago. Are there specific factors that impact that growth in terms of which categories and why they're growing?
And that's always quite difficult to evaluate because there's so many different categories and many of them are in growth and many of them are in decline. What we think we can confidently say is that categories that meet specific trends that are important these days seem to do better. So at the moment, we do see categories that are linked to health, quick snacking, easy drinking. Proteins are obviously the topic of the day in many markets. Categories that miss out on these trends, for example, that miss out on meat reduction, that miss out on easy cleaning, on low fat, maybe even on growing a beard. Those categories have a harder time to achieve growth. I mean, overall, winning is linked to more people in a population choosing a category and not the same people choosing the category more often. So what you need to focus on is to get as many people interested in your category by making sure that the category meets as many consumer needs as possible. And that means don't just focus on the obvious need, think of other needs that you can credibly address. So if we think of a very simple category like rice, I mean, obviously rice is a phenomenally successful side dish, but it could also serve lots of other uses, like it's easy to digest, it's gluten-free, it's a good source of carbohydrates, it's easy to cook. So there's lots of other arguments why somebody might decide to choose rice, and you need to make sure as a marketer that people can think of your category in as many different instances as possible.
So that leaves some specific types of recommendation. Are there any ways in which you can build on that to help our brand manufacturers to understand how to develop their categories, as well as, of course, their brands within that?
Yes. So essentially, you need to be there when people are thinking of purchasing your category, which means that when they enter the store, they should be thinking of your category and your brand. And when they're in front of the shelf, where you still compete with other partially similar categories, depending on how retailers allocate their shelves, you need to make sure that you've created enough attention through your advertising, through new products, but also in store, through facings, through delivering usage ideas, through in-store activation, that people can easily retrieve what they've learned about your category and your brand and end up choosing it at the point of sales. Which also implies that you shouldn't be making the mistake that lots of brand manufacturers are making, which is hiding in bad times. Because you want to reach your bottom line, you may feel inclined to cut down on advertising, to cut down on in-store activation, to cut down on innovation in times where private labels usually are most active. So resist the temptation, learn from the mistakes that have happened in the past, basically in all past crises. Resist the temptation to cut your investment too much in bad times. Even if you keep the same level of investment, you'll still stand out more because most others are likely to going to cut their investments. What I'd like to conclude with is a model that a colleague of mine at Harvard Business School developed a number of years ago, Professor John Quelch. He basically argued that in bad times, you'll find different consumer segments who will be more or less affected by the current recession. And you will find categories that are more or less affected by the current recession. And the combination of those two dimensions signals in how much danger your sales might be. So are the people that you're trying to reach particularly endangered, or do they feel the economic heat quite a lot? Or do you typically address people who don't have economic concerns? And is your category one where people might think of delaying purchasing, or do you sell products that are so essential that people don't have an incentive to cut down the investment in bad times? And I think this is something that most organizations may have a rough idea about, but it's also something that through proper research can be investigated quite thoroughly so that you can evaluate the level of risk that you're facing quite precisely. And I'm sure there's a lot of information that my colleagues in the upcoming interview series will add to that, especially when it comes to effective marketing in recessions.
Indeed. I think it's interesting. Don't hide, continue to invest, and also bear in mind that there are different consumer segments. I remember some work that was done some years ago to show that unemployed people and people who are likely to be feared about unemployment were always much more likely to switch to private label than others. That sort of thing shows the sort of differences that potentially there are. But many thanks for today. Our next video in the series will be with Professor Koen Pauwels. Koen is Distinguished Professor at the of Marketing at Northeastern University, Boston, and his specific area of analysis and input will be around marketing mix and promotion. So that will be our next video. But thank you, Oliver, and thank you all for listening. Thank you.